Family court judges must not allow parents to see their children if there's any risk of harm to the child, either physically or psychologically. The order is part of new tougher guidance that's being brought in on Monday to protect children during custody battles. The changes follow a campaign by the charity Women's Aid, which was launched on this programme last January. In the last 12 years, 20 children have been murdered because they've had contact with an abusive parent. Our legal correspondent Clive Coleman is here and can explain what these changes mean. What are the changes, Clive?
Well, the most important one is that judges are being told what they are required to do, as you said, what they must do, rather than, under the previous guidance, what they should do. So the language is considerably beefed up. And they're told that in child contact cases where there is domestic abuse, there is now a mandatory requirement for the court to determine whether both the child or the parent, the non-abusing parent looking after the child, will be at risk if there is a contact order. Now, if there is a risk of that, then a contact order should not be made, even if that contact is for supervised contact within a contact centre. So it's really beefing up the language, it's focusing the judge's attention on the risk of harm. There's also a greater or broader definition of what domestic abuse amounts to, more guidance on what is coercive control, psychological abuse, developmental harm to the child. And it also makes it clear that judges must carefully consider how domestic abuse impacts on children, and in particular, and this is absolutely critical, it questions the presumption. There is a presumption within our law that contact with both parents is in the child's best interest, is in their welfare interests. Now, judges must now question that, and I think that is a significant change of emphasis. In family law, there's always a pendulum, if you like, and there is a feeling, I think, that the pendulum has swung too far in favour of the presumption that it is in the child's interest always to have contact with both parents. And this really rows back on that and focuses the judge's attention. OK,
so firmer language, more wide-ranging. Will they make a difference, these changes? Well,
obviously, the hope is that they will. As you said, there have been some absolutely catastrophic failures of the system, and I think the judiciary are very, very aware of that. But a lot of this is going to come down to the training that judges get. There will be risk assessment hearings, there will be experts involved, but it is really up to the judges to be well trained and to take on board fully this new guidance. Obviously, the hope and the expectation is it will make a real, genuine difference. Speaking to people, there are mixed opinions as to how concrete that difference will be. Obviously, everyone hopes it will solve this dreadful problem.
Why are there mixed opinions? In the case of there being negative ones, what are the risks?
Well, I think there are. One of them is the training of judges, and some people you speak to feel that judges simply are not trained well enough to. I mean, it is a fiendishly difficult job to do, and it is regrettably the case that some people, do game the system, they do lie, they do deceive, and it's for judges to unpick all of that. But, I think there is a real concern that unless they have proper professional face-to-face training with experts, then it's going to be difficult for them to have the confidence to apply this.
OK. Thank you very much. You're going to stay with us. We are also joined now by Claire Throssell, who launched the campaign for these changes with us last year. Now, Claire's two sons, Jack and Paul, were killed by her former partner, Darren Sykes, in a house fire in October in 2014 while they were on a weekend access visit. We're also joined by Lucy Reid, who is a family lawyer and who is in our Bristol studio. Claire, thank you so much for coming in and talking to us. I know you've been on this programme several times before. How much do these changes mean to you?
Oh, it means the world if the judges actually take this on board and are open to the training and open to the fact that coercive control and mental and emotional abuse is as harmful as physical abuse. Just because you can't see the bruises doesn't mean to say that the scars aren't there, and they're there forever. You can look in a mirror and you get to a point where you don't recognise the person looking back at you, and it's the same for the children. This has meant 2 years of hard work. getting to this point, for the government to even start listening and start recognising emotional and coercive control. And for this to happen now, it's a great step forward, but I'm hoping it moves on to even more, such as the aggressive cross-questioning in court. Family courts still need to be made much safer for the victims of all domestic abuse cases. And when I went to do Downing Street in January and we handed in the petition, there was 45,000 people adding their voice to this. There's people that have wrote to me from all over the country that are going through this process, which is so traumatic, and it's so easy for the children's voices to get lost amongst the process and the trauma of the separation, and it's so hard for the people to get out of their situation. And what I'd like to say to them today is, this is the start of the hope. This is the start of the journey for things to change for all the children. It's too late for my two, but their voices have finally been heard. Jack was never interviewed. The day that he was supposed to have his interview with Kafkas was the day he fell asleep in my arms, and that must never happen again. No 12-year-old should have to say to a fireman or a policeman or a doctor, my dad did this and he did it on purpose. We have to protect children more, and for me today, or Monday, it's the start of that hope, because if we don't have hope, we have nothing, and if we have nothing, then nothing can ever change. And I'd just like to say to everybody out there, it is starting to change. Believe in us. We're still fighting, we're still getting our voices out there.
And your fight has been instrumental in making these changes come about. It's been 3 years since you tragically lost your boys. Can you remind us what happened?
Yes, they were on an access visit, just 3 hours, and that's all it, well, it took just 15 minutes for my life to end and my existence to start. They had gone down to see their dad. I missed them by 5 minutes that day. I'd been working, and the police came to the door 20 minutes later with a knock, and my mum said, that's the boys, they're back. I said, no, they'd have run through the door and given me a hug, because they were scared, they were frightened, they needed reassurance whenever they came back. And a policeman was stood on the door, and I knew by his face, and I said, what's he done? Because I had warned Kafkas and social services that he was capable of hurting the boys, and they didn't want to see him. And he said there'd been an incident at the house, there'd been a fire, and I needed to go with him now to Sheffield Children's Hospital. I went to Sheffield Children's Hospital, and there was Paul, and he was having CPR done, and they said, there's nothing more we can do now, we're going to let him go. And as I held him in my arms, I promised him that I wouldn't let no other parent have to go through this, and no other parent should have to hold their children in their arms as they die, knowing it's at the hands of somebody who should protect and love them. And finally, on Monday, that promise has begun to be fulfilled. 7 days later, I held Jack the same way in Manchester Hospital, and he died too. And as I say, that was the day that Kafkas was supposed to be interviewing Jack. His voice was never heard, and now his voice has finally been heard. His wishes and feelings are out there, and as I say, it's too late for them, but we can make things right for other people. We can give children a voice, have their wishes and feelings recognised. There is a law there already that isn't used enough about children's wishes and feelings. It's contact at any cost, and this, as Colin quite rightly said, needs to change, and no perpetrator.
It's changing on Monday. Well, why don't we bring in our family law specialist, Lucy. Lucy, do you think the changes that are coming in on Monday will stop tragic cases like these from happening again?
I don't think that whatever changes are brought in terms of guidance can completely eradicate the type of tragic case that Claire is describing. These cases are very difficult to predict and very difficult to completely prevent. Fortunately, they're quite rare, exceptional cases where children are killed or parents are killed, but it is important that all those professionals in the system, whether it's judges or lawyers or CAFCAS officers, are made increasingly aware of the risks, not just of obvious kinds of physical violence, but the softer, more difficult to identify types of abuse, such as coercive control. This guidance, by and large, has been in place for a number of years. Coercive control is something that's been identified in our guidance for a number of years. What won't happen on Monday is that we suddenly achieve a realisation that that's as significant as physical abuse. It's always been on the radar, but it's right that there is a need for us to get better at identifying that type of abuse and understanding what its impact is on children and on caring parents, and dealing with the risk management, making sure that we make safe orders.
How do you identify that type of abuse, especially when it is coercive, controlling, emotionally abusive behaviour? Because judges, as Clive was saying, are going to be trained to deal with this, but part of that must be trying to spot the signs of it in the first place.
Well, coercive control in particular, non-physical violence, where there isn't an obvious black eye or a physical injury that can be seen, is more difficult to prove by its nature. And the reality is that judges are faced with a very difficult task. Some allegations that are made are true and accurate. Some allegations are not accurate for one reason or another. Maybe they're exaggerated, and in some cases they're malicious. And judges have to try and work out, from the best evidence they can gather, where the truth of things lie. What has happened in the past in the first instance? The court will make findings of fact, and then having decided what has happened in the past, we'll need to look at, well, what does that mean in terms of the risk? What's happened in the past? What's the current situation? What is a perpetrator's attitude towards what he or she has done? Is there any evidence of change? What can we do to manage any risks that we've identified? So there's a whole process which has been in the guidance that's been updated for a number of years. One of the main concerns that has been raised, largely based on anecdotal evidence, but which is consistent with my experience as a barrister, is that that guidance hasn't always been consistently applied by judges. And for me, what's more important than the amendments to the guidance, because by and large it's substantially the same as it has been for years, is the emphasis from the President of the President of the Family Division. When he's reissued this guidance, he has very emphatically said that it's really important that judges are following this guidance in every case, whether it's physical violence or other forms of abuse. And for me, one of the important changes in the guidance is that where we used to talk about domestic violence and abuse, the language has now shifted. We talk about abuse now because there's a recognition that there isn't a more serious and a less serious type of abuse. All those different types of abusive behaviour are as important, as potentially harmful, as potentially risky.
Lucy, thank you. Claire, will the fight continue?
Definitely. It's not over yet. I just hope that the judges really take this on board and undertake the training, and that children aren't made to see a parent until their interviews have been made, their views have been heard and their voices have been listened to, no matter what age they are, even if they only whisper what they need, they must be listened to and understood.
Claire, thank you very much. Lucy and Clive as well for speaking to us this morning. Now,